In the campaign, I promised the American people that I would build a cutting-edge missile defense shield to protect our homeland from the threat of foreign missile attack. And that's what we're doing.
U.S. President Donald Trump announced a plan to build a new missile defense program. Trump says the Golden Dome will be able to shoot down missiles and drones, even if launched from space, expected to cost up to $175 billion and take 3 years to build. The president says Canada wants to join.
We are conscious that we have an ability, if we so choose, to complete the Golden Dome with investments and partnership. And it's something that we are looking at. We have just
So Prime Minister Carney says Canada is looking at it and has been involved in high-level discussions. Canada and the U.S. already work together, though, through NORAD, which can detect and shoot down some threats like cruise missiles. But Canada is not part of the American ballistic missile system, defense system. So should Canada take part in the Golden Dome? I spoke earlier to one of Canada's former top commanders at NORAD. Retired Lieutenant General Christopher Coates, thank you for joining us, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much. Glad to be with you.
What do you think this Golden Dome will look like in terms of a system that protects a landmass as big as the United States and potentially Canada?
Yeah, so I think it's going to be a system of systems. So it's going to use some of the technologies that are already present today that might be being used individually or on their own to defend North America. And then I think there are going to be some new systems that are added in. And so Golden Dome will become a system of systems that brings together satellites, ground-based radars, other kinds of detectors, all integrated into one big system that then is connected to those things that can respond or take effect. So like missiles to shoot down missiles, or aircraft, perhaps if it's a cruise missile or a drone that's being intercepted, or perhaps small missiles on the ground to intercept some of the more close-in threats that it might be set up to protect against. So it's a system of systems, and it's not like there's just going to be, here's the description of what Golden Dome is, and we'll go out and buy one of those. This is going to be, I suspect, an evolving capability.
It also sounds very ambitious, and I think that's what people are questioning since this was discussed recently, both in the timeline and the price tag. How realistic is what the president is saying in terms of having something in place, say, within 3 years?
Yeah, I think it's actually pretty realistic to have something in place, as you just described it. So when I was at NORAD, we were able to see the introduction of some new technologies that improved NORAD's radars very quickly by working closely with industry. And so I think, not knowing exactly what the system's going to look like or how it's going to be created, but I suspect that within a short period of time, there's going to be significant advancements bringing in some of these capabilities, integrating them in and adding in new capabilities. Some of the stuff might take a little bit longer. In terms of the price tag, yeah, I think what we've heard in the news at $25 billion, what the president announced, is probably a great start, and it'll grow after that. I think where it will end will depend. It'll depend a bit on how far it has to keep evolving.
As you well know, and other people might remember, Canada said no to a system like this under Paul Martin. I think it was back in 2008. What makes you think, or 2005, what makes you think that this is something that Canada should consider now? I mean, put aside the fact that the technology has evolved, I understand that piece, but why do you think that this is something Canada should at least consider being involved in?
I think it was smart to consider being involved back when this has been considered in the past, because threats were starting to appear. But the threats today are evolving. There's a bit of an arms race going on around the world. Canada and the United States can be threatened with continuously advancing capabilities, and we have to do something. We can't just sit there and allow adversaries to develop capabilities, so something needs to be done. And I think this is the right step in the right direction.
So what would you say to Canadians who say, well, what is NORAD for? I thought that's what NORAD did. That's how we protected ourselves with the United States.
Yeah, and that's what NORAD was doing. And as was discussed during the election campaign, and the military has been saying it for a while, and NORAD's been saying it for a while, NORAD needs to be modernized. And one of the steps with this modernization is start to be able to deal with all of the missile threats in addition to aircraft-style threats. So a part of NORAD modernization could be seen as this carrying on and development of what's called an integrated air and missile defense capability. So this is what NORAD does, but NORAD has to advance with the times, and I think this is part of that.
How concerned are you that we are considering this at a time when our sovereignty has been threatened and our relationship with the United States is at very least evolving? Why do you think that this is the right time under this president to consider this?
Right. So I think that it's the right time because the threats are there and capabilities are now allowing us to imagine a solution, to come up with a way to counter those threats. So that's in terms of what's right about that. In terms of our relationship with the United States, NORAD has lived through all sorts of challenges between the Canada and U.S. relationship over the years and come out as a strong command doing its job defending North America. And so that's sort of built into NORAD. The people that work inside NORAD, our two militaries, they understand that there are going to be tensions between the two countries from time to time, but they work through it. And so this is perhaps the most extreme of those kind of examples we've seen over the years, but we've got through it in the past, and NORAD will get through it again in the future to come out even stronger.
What could Canada contribute beyond money to a project like this, if it indeed goes ahead?
So Canada always contributes the space. So what I mean by that is the territory over which weapons will threaten the U.S. So Canada contributes that. We contribute our people that are part of NORAD. We can contribute some technologies that could be developed. Canada has a burgeoning space industry that's quite strong in certain areas, and I'm sure there's stuff that could be offered there. There'll be ground link stations. There'll be places to put interceptor missiles, perhaps, or other kinds of directed energy, perhaps weapons, if that actually happens. So Canada has a lot that it could offer, I believe.
Is there any way that Canada would not be part of this? I mean, if the United States went ahead, and again, we've been talking about this for decades, so we'll see whether or not it happens, but is there any way that Canada would just not be part of this and the United States would somehow create this protection system just over the U.S. and Canada would sort of be left out in the cold?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely a possibility, that if Canada decided to not participate, the United States would carry on nonetheless. It's a requirement to defend the United States for the Americans, and Canada has a requirement, the Canadian government has a requirement to defend Canada. We can either do it by ourselves or in collaboration with our neighbor that shares the continent with us. It's going to be easier, better, and more effective if we do it with the United States. So it's possible they do it by themselves if we chose not to participate, but I don't think that would be the best solution.
So just finally, tell me how then the announcement that the Prime Minister made before the election about the over-the-horizon radar missile detection system for Canada's north is different, or whether that fills in some of those gaps.
Yeah, so if you remember, Rosemary, I said it's going to be a system of systems.
Yeah.
One of those systems will be the two over-the-horizon radars. One of them is the Arctic over-the-horizon radar, which was announced, and then there's another one called the Polar over-the-horizon radar. Those two supplement the North Warning System, which will probably remain in place, probably be upgraded, updated to help it better serve its purpose. And so all of those aspects come together along with the space element that's being discussed. So it's all part of this system of systems to help defend North America.
And Canada's north needs this security in a way that it didn't before. Is that fair to say?
I think it's always needed it, but today the threats are such that we have to start taking it really seriously. I mean, we can imagine some scenarios where if Canada was unable to defend the North, that there are opportunities for adversaries to really make it a difficult strategic problem for Canada. So we need to be able to exercise control. We need to be able to deter adversaries from ever considering doing something untoward in our Arctic spaces.
Retired Lieutenant General Christopher Coates, thank you for your time today, sir.
Thank you.
Are there specific steps you're looking for the EU to take?
We do. Well, we have a lot of requests, and you don't have the people to handle it, frankly. Everybody wants to make a deal. I'm sure now the European Union wants to make a deal very badly, but they don't do it right. They don't go about it right.
That was the president discussing his latest round of tariff threats against the European Union. Trump suggested a 50% tax on all imports from the EU on social media. This comes after weeks of negotiations and frustration from the president on the lack of a deal. That's where we will start with our American Roundtable today. Joining me from Washington is Domenico Montanaro. He's a senior politics editor and correspondent for NPR. And Darlene Superville is a White House reporter for the Associated Press. Good to see both of you. Thanks for doing this. Darlene, I'm going to start with you. Is this new threat on the EU a pressure tactic because the president is, as I said, getting kind of frustrated with the lack of a deal?
It could very well be. If you remember back in April when he announced a series of country-specific tariffs, a week later he put them on delay and said that he was doing that so that different countries could negotiate specific agreements with the United States. And my sense is that what he's done, what he said about the EU here recently could very well be along the same lines. We saw him say that negotiations are going nowhere. He's feeling frustrated. And it could very well be just a tactic by the president to try to jumpstart negotiations, which he seems to want to have wrapped up in short order. But traditionally, trade negotiations do take a long time.
They sure do. And it's also, sometimes he makes the deal, but there's a whole bunch of details that have to be worked out. Domenico, the fact that he was able to, get somewhere with China, but not somewhere with the European Union, how do you interpret that?
Well, clearly there's frustration there on the part of the president. He promised over 200 deals and they'd be happening in short order. Then he told reporters to basically stop asking him about the deals and when they were coming. So, clearly he's upset. He's frustrated that this is going nowhere in his words. But, that's the thing. These things are difficult. They include multi-million-dollar, multi-billion-dollar corporations in many respects, industries that are important to companies on both sides of the Atlantic. And you can't just make these big, broad promises and say that they're going to happen immediately. And we've seen this not just with the trade deals, but with the wars overseas, like with Ukraine and Russia, and with Gaza and Israel really not listening to pressure from the United States and from European allies.
Let's move to this issue around Harvard. Darlene, we're watching it from here. There appears to be some personal animosity, I guess, that the president feels towards Harvard in particular, but other post-secondary institutions. Explain what's going on here and what he's trying to do.
Well, initially what he was trying to do was to force Harvard and other institutions, Columbia University being another one, to deal with issues of anti-Semitism on campus. And that's why you saw the administration take a very hard line trying to demand changes in curriculum and policy and so on and so forth by these institutions. But now it seems to have gone a step or two further with Harvard. Federal funding has been threatened. And this week they said that Harvard would no longer be able to accept foreign students on campus. And that's been put on hold by a federal judge, but it's sort of unclear what the end game is here. One of the things that I do see happening, though, is that Harvard's reputation as one of America's elite institutions of higher education is being threatened because a fourth of the student population comes from abroad, and a lot of those students now are just uncertain about their futures at Harvard.
Domenico, what is it about trying to, regulate speech on campuses? Is it about trying to attack Ivy League schools and who President Trump might think are the elites? Like, what is actually motivating the president here?
Yeah, I think you hit on it a little bit because I think that there's been this broad attempt, a public relations attempt within the White House to take issues or institutions that they feel like are more palatable, they'll be more popular to be able to make this case. To say, for example, when you deport migrants who are in the United States, are you in favor of keeping gangs in the United States? To Democrats who would say there's no due process, for example, a much more esoteric thing to think about. When it comes to Harvard, well, a quarter of the campus, as Darlene points out, is international students. There was, what the administration is saying is anti-Semitism on campus, and Harvard was slow to deal with that on campus while the protests were happening. And they feel like, hey, this is an elite institution. There's a degree of anti-elitism that's happening within the country right now. And they feel like this is a fight that they want to be able to have. Now, the administration leveling some of this pressure at other institutions, including big law firms in the United States, has yielded some deals with those organizations. But Harvard has said, not us, not this time. Their $53 billion endowment helping them to be able to push back with these lawsuits with really big law firms as well. So we have an institution that is standing up to Trump to say they're not going to be, they are going to go as far as they possibly can with this. And it's going to be really notable to see what happens. There's another hearing on Thursday in this case to see what happens going forward.
Okay, we have to talk about the Golden Dome. We're going to talk about it in the next hour as well, because the president says Canada is interested. Our prime minister is saying, we're talking to them just to know what's going on. How realistic is this, Darlene, in terms of the money and the timeline and the need for this?
Well, I think the Pentagon has warned for years about Russia and China developing advanced missiles and all the rest. So there is an argument for some kind of a system like this. Whether it can be done by the end of the president's first term, as he said this week when he was announcing the program, that remains to be seen. It's going to obviously take some time to develop all of this. He's asked for $25 billion in the budget bill that is currently moving through Congress. We'll have to see what the Senate does. The House passed the bill. The Senate is now going to be taking it up shortly. So there are a lot of factors that are still to be worked out on this.
Domenico, this has been obviously discussed for decades, all the way back to Ronald Reagan. Technology is better now. It wouldn't be as complicated to do, but how feasible is this at this stage?
Well, we're talking about $25 billion in this mega bill that Republicans are looking to continue to pass along the lines. I mean, remember, the Senate still has to approve this bill, but it could cost something like $500 billion. So it's a significant amount of money, number one. And number two, you've got a country in Canada that Trump has now alienated to a degree because of this trade war, and being able to win over the population in Canada would have been a lot easier 3 or 4 months ago when the U.S. and Canada had an easier, relationship, which it had for decades on this kind of thing, where you'd have easier cooperation. I don't think that there are a lot of Canadians, and you could tell me better, who are really willing right now to just sort of do whatever Trump wants. Clearly, that's not the case. And I think that Trump feels like he can say publicly, oh, sure, the Canadians want to do this, when the reality tends to be something different.
Yeah, especially if it's billions and billions of dollars that he wants from us. Domenico Montanaro and Darlene Somerville, thank you so much for making the time for us. Appreciate it.
You got it.